My name is Barbara Mitchell, 67 years old, and I've lived my whole life in Seattle. I never imagined that one day, the deepest pain of my life would come from my own daughter, the one I poured all my love into raising. That winter night, as the cold wind whistled through the window, I opened the mailbox on my porch. My hands trembled as I pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was a notice of sale for the very house I had bought with sweat, tears, and 30 years of endless sacrifice. But what left me utterly numb wasn't the paper itself. It was the name printed clearly on it. The seller was Sarah, my daughter. My breath caught when I saw the small note clipped to it. Mom, this house now belongs to us. It's time for you to find another place. I think you'll understand. Can you imagine that feeling, when the very child you gave life to, raised with all your love, sees you as nothing more than a burden? If one day you received a message like that, what would you do? Bow your head and accept it, or stand up and protect your dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay with me, because right after this, I'll tell you everything. From the sacrifices that seemed endless, to the day the truth was finally revealed. When I was forced to face my very own daughter, I stood frozen on the porch, the letter shaking in my hands. My heart felt as if it were being squeezed. Caught between grief and anger, Sarah's words kept burning in my mind. Each cold stroke of her handwriting cutting into me like a knife. I couldn't comprehend how the daughter I had devoted my youth to raising, caring for every meal, every night's sleep, could now write such words. I collapsed onto the steps, my wrinkled hands clutching the paper, as memories of the days and months raising her flooded back with painful clarity. I remember that fateful day when Sarah's father passed away. It was a cold morning at the construction site, when a sudden accident took from me the only man I ever loved. I was just past 30, and Sarah was still a little girl. Her wide, bewildered eyes looked at me as she asked, "Mom, where's Dad? Why isn't he coming home to have dinner with me anymore?" I held her tight, brushed away my tears, and promised her, "From now on, it's just the two of us. But I won't let you go without." That promise I carved into my heart for decades. From that day on, I was both mother and father. I worked every job I could to keep a roof over our heads. By day, I cleaned hotel rooms, my hands calloused from scrubbing floors, changing bed sheets, and hauling trash. In the afternoons, I tutored neighborhood kids just to earn a little extra for Sarah's school books. At night, while everyone else slept, I put on my white coat and stepped into long hospital shifts. Many nights I nodded off in the corner of the staff room, my eyes burning with exhaustion, but my mind still counting Sarah's tuition. I remember the night Sarah burned with fever and I had to beg for leave from my hospital shift. The manager snapped, "If you take off again, who's going to cover? Don't expect pay." All I could do was bow my head, whisper an apology, and cradle my daughter, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead through the long night. In my heart, nothing was more important than her. Over the years, widowers approached me with proposals. They said I shouldn't stay alone, that I deserved happiness. But every time I thought of Sarah, I shook my head. I was afraid that if I remarried, she would suffer forced to share her mother's love with another man. So I chose solitude, accepting loneliness so my daughter could grow up in a home that felt secure. This house, my husband and I bought it with the very first savings we scraped together after 10 long years of hard labor. I remember the day we moved in. He lifted 3-year-old Sarah into his arms, spinning her around the empty living room. He laughed. "This will be the place where she grows up, our home." And I believed him. After he was gone, I clung to this house as though I were holding on to a piece of his soul. Every brick, every wall, soaked with our sweat and tears. As Sarah grew, I poured everything into her education. I still remember the day her college acceptance letter arrived. My hands shook with joy as I held it. I cried. And Sarah cried too. She hugged me and said, "Mom, I'll study hard. One day, I'll take care of you, so you won't have to suffer anymore." I believed her. I believed it so much that I emptied my savings, borrowed from friends, and paid her tuition. I even took weekend shifts, trading away countless sleepless nights. Sometimes I looked at my swollen, red hands, the joints stiff and aching from endless labor. But the moment I saw Sarah with new books or clothes for class, my heart softened. I never thought of myself as suffering, because everything was worth it if my daughter could live well. On stormy nights, when the little house shook under the wind, I sat by the window, praying for Sarah to have a future brighter than mine. I whispered to myself, "Barbara, just hold on a little longer. As long as she succeeds, it will all be worth it." And when Sarah graduated, I was filled with pride. I still see her in her gown, walking across the stage to receive her diploma. I sat in the audience, tears blurring my eyes. My smile stretched so wide, my lips cracked. I thought, finally, all my sacrifices had been repaid. But now, those memories cut into me like blades. I asked myself, had I loved too much, sacrificed too much? Until my daughter no longer knew the worth of it, was it because I always protected, always carried the burdens, that Sarah never learned to value her mother's love, or the bond of family? I sank onto the floor. The letter crumpled in my hands. I looked around this familiar house, the beige walls I had painted myself, the old wooden chair where my husband once read the newspaper, the small dining table where we gathered every night. Everything reminded me that this was more than a shelter, it was the vessel of a lifetime of sacrifice. And now, my own daughter wanted to erase it all, as if I had never existed. Inside me, pain and emptiness piled high, but deep in my heart, a small flame stirred. A quiet voice whispered, "Enough. Barbara, you've endured all your life. Maybe it's time to face the truth." I still remember so clearly the day Sarah brought Brian home to meet me. It was a late autumn afternoon, sunlight faintly streaming through the kitchen window. Sarah walked in, her hand tightly holding that of a tall, well-dressed man in a deep red tie. Brian's confident smile seemed to light up the entire room. "Mom, this is Brian. The one I told you about," Sarah introduced excitedly. I looked into my daughter's eyes and saw the sparkle I had longed to see, the look of a young woman in love, believing the man beside her would bring her happiness. I reached out to shake Brian's hand, silently telling myself that after all these years of sacrifice, perhaps it was finally time I could feel at peace about my daughter's future. Brian spoke smoothly, asking me questions, calling me Mom with a sweetness that felt disarming. Though a small part of me stayed cautious, I reassured myself, maybe I'm just worrying too much. Sarah deserves to be loved. The wedding took place the following spring, under blooming cherry blossoms. I still remember crying, not out of sadness, but because I believed my daughter had finally found someone to share life's burdens with, a new family to lean on. I personally prepared every detail, from the pure white gown Sarah wore to the bouquet of carnations I believed would bring luck to her marriage. But that joy didn't last long. Just a few months after the wedding, I began to notice something was wrong. Brian often spoke on the phone late into the night, his tone hurried and heavy. Envelopes from banks started arriving more frequently, and whenever I happened to see one, Sarah would quickly tuck it away. When I asked, she only gave a nervous smile. "It's nothing, Mom. Just a few investments that haven't gone well." I wanted to believe her, but a mother's instincts made me uneasy. Then one evening after dinner, Brian suddenly spoke up. He sat upright, his hands clasped on the table as though he were negotiating a contract. "Mom," he said in a syrupy tone, "I think it's time we reorganize the paperwork for the house. If it's under me and Sarah's names, it'll be more convenient when we need to take out a loan to expand the business. Of course, you'll still live here. Nothing changes." My chest tightened. This house meant everything to me. It was the only keepsake left of my late husband. I looked to Sarah, hoping she would object, but her eyes only pleaded. "Mom, it's just paperwork," Sarah said, clutching my hand, her voice trembling as though afraid I might refuse. "You'll always have a place here. I promise." I froze. I had promised myself I would never do anything to let Sarah down. I had carried the weight of the sky itself so she could have the life she did. And now? She was looking at me with that desperate, trusting gaze. How could I possibly say no? I nodded. The worry gnawed at me. Brian instantly beamed and called his lawyer. The next day, they took me to the notary's office. A thick stack of papers lay before me. Lines of tiny print. Endless clauses. I held the pen, hesitating, and looked at Sarah. She squeezed my hand tightly. "Mom, trust me." Those 3 words wrapped around my heart like an invisible chain. I signed. That night, back at home, I sat for hours in the living room. The warm light glowed over the family photo on the wall. Me, Sarah, and my husband in our younger years. I remembered his words clearly, "Barbara, no matter what happens, always protect this home." And yet here I was, signing it away with my own hand, clinging only to the fragile promise of my daughter. Afterward, everything seemed normal on the surface. Brian often acted caring. Sarah still called to ask if I was eating well whenever she was busy. But I began to notice the house no longer felt like mine. Sarah changed the curtains. Brian brought in expensive furniture, placing it in corners as though erasing every trace of the past. One time, I suggested keeping my husband's old wooden chair, where he used to sit and read the paper. Brian gave a polite laugh. "Mom, that chair's too worn out. Let me get you a new, modern one." I looked at Sarah, but she avoided my eyes and said nothing. Soon, the chair was gone, replaced by a cold leather sofa. I sat down and felt out of place, as though I no longer belonged in my own home. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive, that Sarah only wanted better things for me. But with time, the cracks grew deeper. Brian talked more and more about investment opportunities and capital for business, while Sarah grew quieter. I didn't want to doubt my daughter, but unease swelled inside me, like a storm gathering silently on the horizon. And it all began with that fateful signature, the one I thought I gave out of love for my daughter, but which turned into the chain tightening around my very life. That afternoon, the sky over Seattle was gray, heavy with clouds, as if rain were about to fall. I was bent over pulling weeds by the porch when I saw Mr. Jack, my neighbor from across the street, walking toward me. Mr. Jack was a calm man in his 70s, a former lawyer who had practiced for decades before retiring. We had known each other a long time, often exchanging a few words when we met in our front yards or when taking out the trash. But today, his face was different, serious enough to send a chill through me. "Barbara," he said in a low, hesitant voice, "I need to talk to you for a moment. Inside." "If that's all right," I nodded, quickly wiped the dirt from my hands, and led him into the living room. We sat down on the leather sofa Brian had bought not long ago, the cold piece that had replaced my late husband's old wooden chair. I made 2 cups of hot tea, set one before him, trying to keep things natural. But Mr. Jack's eyes betrayed a tension he couldn't hide. "Last week I happened to run into an old friend of mine who works at the bank," he began, He mentioned Sarah and Brian. They're applying for a large loan. And Barbara, this house has been pledged as collateral for it. I froze. His words struck like lightning in my ears. I burst out. That's impossible. You must be mistaken. Jack, this is my house. I've lived here for more than 30 years. This house, Mr. Jack cut in. His voice slow but firm. You signed papers. Didn't you? I'm guessing Brian took you to the notary. Stunned. I remembered that fateful morning at the office. Sarah's hand clutching mine as she whispered, Mom. Trust me. I had nodded like someone blind. Not bothering to read the fine print. I stammered. I thought it was just paperwork. I never imagined they would use my house as collateral. Mr. Jack looked straight at me. His eyes sad but resolute. Barbara, if they repay on time, then nothing happens. But if they default, the bank has the right to seize this house. And when that happens, you're just a guest here. With no rights at all. I felt my heart tighten. I looked around the familiar room, the walls I had painted myself. The dining table where my family once gathered every evening. The framed photo of young Sarah still hanging on the wall. Suddenly, everything felt foreign. As though it no longer belonged to me. I heard my own voice whisper faintly, so, I've turned myself into a tenant in my own home. Mr. Jack sighed, placing his thin hand gently over mine. Barbara, I know this is hard to accept, but you must stay clear-headed. Sarah and Brian are not as simple as you think. I've heard rumors that Brian's business is unstable, that he's drowning in debt. If it all collapses, this house will be the first price to pay. His words left me reeling. In my mind, images clashed together. Sarah, as a little girl, sobbing in my arms after her father died. The long nights I worked hospital shifts. My eyes dark with exhaustion, but still forcing a smile when I came home. And then, that morning I signed the papers. Not reading. Only trusting in my daughter's fragile promise. I held my head. My voice trembling. What have I done? Jack, I spent my whole life protecting this house. And now, Mr. Jack shook his head. Don't blame yourself. People often take advantage of those who only know how to love. What matters now is protecting yourself. Find out the truth before it's too late. In that moment, a bitter truth hit me all these years. I had made myself too solid a foundation for Sarah. I had sheltered her. I carried every hardship, so she only saw a road paved with roses. And now, she and her husband had so easily turned me into a tool for their own gain. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the front garden, where the roses I tended still bloomed. I had dreamed of leaving this house to Sarah as a legacy of her parents' love. But to her, it was nothing more than a commodity to trade for money. Jack. I turned back, my voice breaking but firm. I can't let this happen. I can't let this house vanish as if it never belonged to me. Mr. Jack nodded, his eyes steady with determination. You need to be prepared. Barbara, the road ahead won't be easy. But remember, you're not alone. I stayed silent. Inside me, pain smoldered, but so did a faint light. I knew I had reached the point of no return, and in that moment, I realized that keeping silent any longer would mean losing everything. One afternoon, when Sarah and Brian told me they were heading to Portland for a few days to meet with business partners, I sat quietly in the living room, my mind in turmoil. Ever since Mr. Jack's warning, I had lived in a constant state of unease, as if standing at the edge of a cliff. Each time I saw Sarah smile and speak to me, I no longer saw the innocence of the daughter I once knew, but rather a trace of something cold and unfamiliar in her eyes. That evening, the house felt unusually silent. I walked through the wide rooms, And now, every wall, every piece of furniture seemed to whisper, "You are only a guest in your own home." Doubt and fear pressed heavily against my chest. At last, I could not hold back. I told myself, "Barbara, you need to know the truth. If you keep closing your eyes and trusting empty promises, you will lose everything." I stepped into Sarah's room. The room she and Brian shared had changed so much since the days when I had painted the walls a soft blue, hoping my daughter would have a peaceful place to rest. Now, the shelves were cluttered with files, papers, and scattered documents. My heart pounded as I reached out and flipped through the stacks. Then I froze. In the middle of the pile, I saw a contract with a bold red seal. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, my vision blurring when I read the words in bold, "House Sale Agreement." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. The second page, then the third, and then I saw the line that made my blood run cold. Party A, Barbara Mitchell, must vacate the house before June 30th. I stood there, stunned. My hands shook as I held the papers, my eyes stinging with tears. So it wasn't just about collateral, not just about a temporary loan. They had arranged to sell the house altogether and had even set a date for me to leave. As if I were nothing more than excess baggage, I sank onto the edge of the bed, the contract slipping from my hands to the floor. Tears streamed down my face without my realizing. In my mind echoed Sarah's voice on the day she graduated, "Mom, I'll take care of you. You'll never have to suffer again." I had believed her, believed so much that I gave her this home. And now what did she see me as shaking? I kept searching. In a drawer, I found an unsealed envelope, hastily labeled in Sarah's handwriting to Brian. I opened it, read line by line, and felt my heart shatter. "Brian, once Mom moves out, we'll have enough capital to invest in your company. She's already lived her life. I'm tired of pretending to be grateful. Once we get past this stage, we'll finally be free." I dropped the letter, clutching my chest. Each word stabbed deeper than the last. It wasn't just deception. It wasn't just being used. My own daughter, the child I gave birth to, raised day after day, hour after hour, now saw me as a burden, an obstacle in the way of the life she wanted. In her eyes, I was nothing more than someone who had already lived my life. I heard myself whisper into the empty room, "Oh, my child, how could you?" The room was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. I looked into the mirror and saw my weary, aging face staring back. All these years, I had given everything to Sarah, every dollar, every drop of sweat, every chance at my own happiness. I had turned away men who wanted to share my life, shouldered every hardship so she could focus only on her studies and her future. And now, her future was being built by erasing me. I sat motionless for a long time, waves of pain, anger, and crushing disappointment surging through me. I thought of Mr. Jack. He had warned me, but only now, reading these words with my own eyes, did I see the raw truth. I was no longer a foundation, no longer a support to Sarah and Brian. I was nothing but an outdated shadow, destined to disappear so their ambitions could take my place. The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to reality. I hurriedly tucked the letter and contract back where I had found them, my heart pounding. Sarah and Brian had returned. I stood at the doorway, watching them enter the house from the balcony, laughing as if nothing had happened. Sarah held onto Brian's arm, resting her head against his shoulder. To me, her smile was no longer the sweet smile of my daughter, but one of cold calculation. I retreated silently to my room, closing the door softly behind me. I sat on the bed, holding my chest, overwhelmed by pain. Now I knew all my sacrifices, All the motherly love I had thought was sacred were, in my daughter's eyes, nothing but a means to an end. And I, the mother who had raised and loved her, had become nothing more than a burden to be cast aside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my eyes staring at the ceiling, my ears hearing nothing but the ticking of the clock. The image of Sarah's unsent letter and the house sale contract hovered around me like shadows. I tried closing my eyes, but every word, every line from that letter burned into my mind. She's already lived her life. That pain was too heavy to bear alone any longer. The next morning, I decided to call Lily. Lily had been my close friend since our younger days. We met when I was working night shifts at the hospital, and she was a reporter for a local newspaper. Over the years, even as life took us down different paths, we kept the habit of meeting for coffee now and then, sharing ordinary stories. Like me, Lily lost her husband early, but she never had children. She once told me, "Barbara, having Sarah is the greatest blessing of your life." I believed her then, until now. I called her, my voice trembling. "Lily, are you free? I need to see you. I really need to." She paused only for a second before replying firmly, "Barbara, I'll be right over. Wait for me." Less than an hour later, Lily appeared at my door. She stepped inside, looked straight into my eyes. And just that was enough to break me. I burst into tears. Lily quickly wrapped her arms around me, gently patting my back like an older sister comforting her sibling. "What's going on?" "Barbara, you look awful," Lily asked, her voice full of worry, with shaking hands. I gave her the letter and the contract I had found. Lily read them silently, her eyes narrowing, her face hardening bit by bit. When she finished, she placed them on the table, took a deep breath, and looked me straight in the eye. "Barbara, listen to me. This isn't just betrayal. This is elder financial abuse. This is a crime. It's not just a family matter." I stared at her, stunned, hardly able to believe it. Financial abuse. But this is my daughter. I don't want to think she could do something so cruel. Lily gripped my hands tightly, her voice resolute. "Barbara, you need to be clear-headed. Loving someone doesn't mean closing your eyes. If you stay silent, you'll lose everything. Not just your house, but your savings, your entire future. Sarah and Brian don't just want a part, they want it all. And they have no intention of stopping." Tears streamed down my face. But what can I do? "Lily, I never imagined fighting against my own daughter." Lily held my shoulders firmly, her voice low but strong. "This isn't fighting your daughter. This is protecting yourself. You cannot let others turn your trust and sacrifice into tools to rob you of everything. Barbara, you deserve to be protected." I sat still, Lily's words ringing like a wake-up call. I suddenly remembered Mr. Jack's warning. And now, Lily, someone who understood the law and the world, was saying the same. There was no turning back. Then Lily spoke carefully. "I know a young lawyer. Her name is Rebecca Turner. She used to work for an organization that protects elderly people from abuse. Rebecca is sharp and passionate. I believe she can help you. Let me call her for you." Hearing that name, my heart filled with both fear and hope. A lawyer, I had never thought I'd need the law to deal with my own family. But I knew if I did nothing, I would lose everything. That afternoon, Lily took me to a small coffee shop near downtown. It was quiet inside, with warm light filling the room. Then Rebecca Turner walked in, a woman in her 30s, slender, with sharp eyes and neatly tied brown hair. She shook my hand, her smile warm, though her eyes were serious. "Mrs. Mitchell, Lily has told me a little, but I want to hear it from you," Rebecca said. So I told her. I told everything from the day my husband died, to raising Sarah alone, the endless nights working, To the morning I signed the papers without reading carefully. I told her about Sarah's unsent letter, the house sale contract, and the heartbreak of realizing my daughter saw me only as someone who had already lived her life. Rebecca listened quietly, never interrupting. When I finished, she spoke slowly. Barbara, you need to understand. What Sarah and Brian have done is not just ungratefulness. It's coercion and asset exploitation. The law has clear protections for you. I looked at her, anxious. But she's my daughter. I don't want to drag her to court. I just want to keep my home. To keep what's left of my life. Rebecca nodded, her voice softening. I understand. We don't have to start with a lawsuit. But we do need to prepare. First, you must regain financial control and stop them from transferring assets. If we wait any longer, they'll go further. Do you want to hold on to your life? Then we start now. Lily leaned in, her voice firm. Barbara, you're not alone. Rebecca and I will be with you. But you must agree to stand up. To sign the authorization for Rebecca to act for you. As soon as you agree, everything will begin to change. I looked at the two women before me, Lily, my lifelong friend, who had stood by me through the years, and Rebecca, the young lawyer with determined eyes. For the first time in many months, a glimmer of hope sparked inside me. I took a deep breath and nodded. All right, I agree. I don't want to stay silent anymore. Rebecca gave me an encouraging smile. Good. Then, from today, we begin. In the days that followed, my life began to take on a different rhythm. If before I had only sat in a daze, passively waiting for the next blow of betrayal, now I had a plan. Clear steps to take. Rebecca, with the sharpness of a young, passionate lawyer, had opened a door I had never dared to imagine before. The path of fighting back. One rainy afternoon, Rebecca sat across from me in the living room, spreading thick folders across the table. Her voice was calm, but each word struck like a hammer, pounding the truth. Barbara, I asked a friend in the field to run a preliminary check on Brian, and you won't believe this. Brian is connected to a small money laundering network, hiding behind so-called investment companies. And this house, the very house you signed over, is being used as a front to launder money. I froze, my hands trembling. You're saying, laundering money, Brian. But Sarah, my daughter, does she know? Rebecca sighed. It's hard to say for certain, but at the very least, the house sale papers, the mortgage contracts, they all bear Sarah's signature alongside Brian's. She can't be entirely innocent. The room suddenly felt colder. I thought I was used to shocks by now. But I wasn't. The pit of betrayal was deeper, darker, filthier than I had imagined. That night, I sat alone, looking out into the garden. I wondered, had Sarah known everything and still chosen to stand with Brian, or had she been dragged in so far she could no longer tell right from wrong? But then I remembered the unsent letter. She's already lived her life. Those words weren't Brian's. That was Sarah's handwriting, Sarah's tone. And so, there was no room left for excuses. Rebecca advised me that I needed more evidence, not just to protect myself, but to put an end to their schemes. We need to know exactly what they're doing. If we only rely on the current paperwork, it's not strong enough to stop them. I nodded. Inside me rose a resolve. I would no longer be the submissive victim. I would be the one to act. The next day, I contacted a private investigation office. The man who came to see me was Mr. Harris, a middle-aged man with silver at his temples but eyes sharp as knives. He listened intently to my story, never interrupting. Then he gave a small nod. Mrs. Mitchell, you did the right thing, calling me. Men like Brian rarely hide too well, because they believe family will never suspect them. I'll trace the money, the transactions, and provide all the evidence you need. But be prepared. The truth may be harder to bear than you think. I gave a bitter smile. Mr. Harris, I think I've lost the ability to be surprised. But no matter what, I want to know. The weeks that followed, my life felt like living two parallel lives. By day, I acted as if nothing had changed in front of Sarah and Brian, still sharing meals, still listening to Sarah's chatter about work, or Brian's vague boasts about investment plans. I sat there, nodding, smiling, but in my heart I recorded every detail. By night, when they were asleep, I sat in my small study with the old leather notebook my husband had once used. I turned it into a journal, writing down every action, every conversation, every suspicious move Sarah and Brian made. I wrote carefully, recording dates and times, even their expressions and tones. I no longer wrote just to ease my heart, I wrote to create a living record. A piece of evidence in case one day something happened to me. March 12th. Brian came home late, his shirt still smelling of cigarette smoke. Sarah asked, and he snapped, saying it was work stuff. I noticed Sarah went quiet, but her eyes flicked to me with a hint of unease. March 15th. Brian bragged about a new partner, mentioned an investment opportunity from Las Vegas. I pretended not to notice, but I memorized every name, he said. With each line I wrote, I felt myself growing stronger, no longer the mother swallowing her tears in silence, but a woman quietly preparing for battle. Mr. Harris often sent me short reports. One evening, he called Mrs. Mitchell. I have news. Brian used an account tied to this house to transfer money to a shell company in Nevada. The money cycled through 3 other small companies before disappearing. This is clear evidence of money laundering. I was silent for a few seconds before replying, keep every piece of evidence. I need it. All of it. After each call, I opened my journal and added more details. I wanted to make sure that if one day I fell, there would still be enough evidence for Rebecca or Lily to carry on. I no longer believed in luck. I had lived my whole life for others. But this time, I was living to protect myself. Some nights, I sat long by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. My heart no longer held only sorrow. Instead, there was a sharp clarity. I realized that when maternal love is betrayed, the pain can destroy you. But from that very pain, a new strength can be born. I no longer trembled like the day I first found Sarah's letter. I had learned to breathe slowly, to observe, to calculate every move. One evening, Rebecca stopped by, bringing new folders. She looked at me and, unexpectedly, smiled. Barbara, you've changed. I no longer see despair in your eyes, but determination. I nodded, my voice low but firm. Rebecca, I've cried enough. Now I want to act. I don't know how it will end, but at the very least, I won't let them think I'm weak. She touched the journal lying on my desk. Keep writing. One day, every line will become undeniable evidence. I gripped the notebook tightly, and for the first time in many years, I felt my heart beating not just from fear, but from a clear purpose. I knew the road ahead was long and filled with obstacles, but I also knew I had begun to walk it not as a betrayed mother, but as a woman determined to reclaim her own life. That evening, the house blazed with lights, cars crowding the driveway. Sarah and Brian were hosting a lavish party, inviting all their friends and business partners. Music drifted through the rooms. Wine glasses sparkled in guests' hands, and laughter filled the air, as if they already had the future in their grasp. I stood at the gate for a moment, my heart heavy as I looked on. This house had once been the place my husband and I built together, where family photos once hung on the walls. Yet tonight, it was nothing more than a stage for my daughter and her husband to to flaunt themselves. Building a so-called empire on betrayal. Rebecca stood beside me. Her voice low but steady. Tonight will be the night they can't hold their heads up again. Are you ready? Barbara the one drew in a deep breath. I've been ready since the day Sarah signed those papers of betrayal. We stepped inside. The glittering room seemed to dim as eyes turned toward me. Sarah froze for a brief second when she saw me. Then quickly forced a smile. Mom, I didn't expect you to come. Don't worry. We've got everything under control. Brian raised his glass, boldly announcing to the crowd, we're about to secure a massive investment. This is only the beginning, applause erupted. But immediately after, Rebecca stepped forward. Her voice calm but clear, sorry to interrupt. But there are things that need to be said right here. In front of all of you. The room fell silent. Harris, the private investigator, opened his black case and handed Rebecca a stack of documents. She held them up, page after page in plain sight. These are copies of financial transactions. This house has been used as collateral, funneled through multiple shell companies for money laundering. The names responsible are none other than Brian Carter and Sarah Carter. Brian's face went pale. He lunged forward to snatch the papers. But Rebecca held firm. Her eyes locked on him. Want to deny it? Brian, your signatures and your wife's are right here. The crowd murmured, many turning their backs on him. Eyes filled with disgust. Sarah panicked. Her face drained of color. No, it wasn't me. It was Brian. He forced me to sign. I didn't know anything. The whispers grew louder. I stood still, quietly watching. Rebecca gave her no chance to continue. She pulled out a recorder, set it on the table, and pressed play. Instantly, Sarah's voice filled the room. My mother is nothing but a cash cow we've drained dry. She's weak, easy to control. We just need to take it all. And it'll be done. The music stopped. The laughter vanished. The room was dead silent. Shocked eyes fell on Sarah. Some shook their heads. An older woman whispered, My God, to say that about your own mother. Sarah broke down, stumbling toward me, her voice choking. Mom, it's not what it sounds like. I was just angry. I didn't mean it. I stepped back, answering evenly, whether you meant it or not. Sarah, your voice said it all. And I've heard enough. Brian, now furious, turned on his wife and snarled, You fool. Sarah, you've ruined everything. Sarah burst into tears. But her crying no longer softened me. It was nothing more than a curtain ripped away, exposing the truth. Rebecca ended firmly. All of this evidence will be handed over to the authorities. Neither of them can deny it any longer. The room that had been buzzing moments before was now the stage for harsh truth. Faces once filled with delight slipped away in silence, leaving Sarah and Brian drowning in panic and despair. I stood there, not angry, not trembling. Inside me was a quiet calm, but also strength. I knew, from this moment on, everything had changed. The day of the final trial arrived, and the sky over Seattle hung gray and heavy, like a curtain pressing down on everything. I sat in the plaintiff's bench, my hands clasped tightly together, but inside I felt an unusual calm. After everything that had happened, I no longer felt trembling or fear. All I wanted was for the truth to be revealed, for justice to be returned to me and to the memory of my late husband. Rebecca sat beside me, her warm hand resting gently on mine as she gave a small nod. You've made it this far. Barbara, let justice handle the rest. Across the courtroom, Sarah kept her head bowed, her hands laced together and shaking. Brian was different. He tried to hold onto a confident face, but his eyes darted nervously, and he kept wiping sweat from his forehead. Looking at them, I felt a pang, but no longer the kind of pain that brought tears. The judge's gavel struck. his voice clear and firm. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court declares the sales contract of the property number null and void. Legal ownership is hereby restored to the plaintiff, Mrs. Barbara Mitchell. The room erupted in murmurs. I closed my eyes for a moment, exhaling deeply. Months of worry and sleepless nights had finally led to this moment. The house, the last keepsake of my husband and me, was back where it belonged. The judge continued. Defendant Brian Carter is charged with financial fraud, connected to money laundering and falsified documents. Co-defendant Sarah Carter will be investigated for aiding and abetting. The gavel struck again, sharp and final. I turned to look at Sarah. My daughter raised her tear-filled eyes. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak. But the words died in her throat. In her gaze, I no longer saw the little girl I once cradled, once brushed her hair each morning. What stood before me now was only a stranger, calculating, selfish in her weakness, willing to trade away even a mother's love. Brian slammed his hand on the table. This is all lies, a setup. The judge's stern voice cut through. Mr. Carter, maintain order. All evidence has been verified. If you continue this outburst, the court will have no choice but to enforce stronger measures. Brian went silent, though his face turned red and his eyes burned with rage. I rose from my seat and walked toward Sarah. She looked at me, her lips trembling. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think it would come to this. I interrupted, my voice steady. Sarah, what you did wasn't a passing mistake. You wrote it. You spoke it. You planned to drive me out of the very house I built. You didn't just take my home, you treated me like a burden. But I just wanted to help Brian. I thought. Her voice broke, frail and weak. I looked straight into her eyes, firm and final. No. Sarah, you didn't think of me. You didn't think of your father. Of the years I worked myself to the bone to raise you. You only thought of yourself. And today, you've brought yourself here. She collapsed into sobs, her head buried in her arms. I heard the sound of her crying, but my heart no longer wavered. I returned to my seat and sat quietly. Rebecca leaned close and whispered, You're incredibly strong. Barbara, most people would have broken in your place, but you didn't. I gave a faint smile. I don't feel strong. I just know I've reached the end of my endurance. When a mother is pushed to the very edge, silence is no longer sacrifice, it becomes destruction. I chose not to stay silent any longer. The trial ended. As I stepped outside, the wind was cold and biting, but inside I felt light, as if a great weight had been lifted. My footsteps were steadier than they had ever been. At the last step of the courthouse stairs, I turned once more to see Sarah, being led away with Brian, her face pale and dazed. I no longer felt anger, only a deep, sorrowful ache. I knew that from this day forward, the bond between mother and daughter was severed for good. I whispered to myself, my Sarah is gone. The one before me now is only a stranger. I didn't choose revenge. I didn't want to feed hatred. But I also would not let my heart remain bound by wounds inflicted by my own blood. I walked on, resolute. For the first time in many years, I felt it clearly. I was truly free. I left that wounded house behind and chose a place entirely different, a small apartment on the third floor of an old building in downtown Portland. Here, the window opens to a narrow balcony filled with white lilies that Lily herself brought me. Every morning, I pull back the curtains and let the sunlight fall across the wooden table where I keep my late husband's old typewriter. The clacking of its keys has become my daily rhythm, recording pages of memories, words meant for myself and for those who may one day listen. My life now is simple. In the mornings, I walk through the park nearby, greeting familiar faces, Mrs. Martha walking her dog, Mr. Henry selling newspapers on the corner. In the afternoons, I often sit in the little cafe below my building, reading a book while soft jazz hums from the worn-out speakers. It isn't lavish. It isn't noisy. But it's enough to make me feel I still belong to the heartbeat of the city. I once thought that a mother's love was unshakable. I once believed that no matter how life changed, children would always be their parents' anchor. But then I learned a painful truth: love, without respect, becomes nothing but chains. And I cut those chains not for revenge, but to reclaim my freedom. At night, I sit by the window, watching the streetlights stretch across the road as the crowds thin. With a warm cup of tea in my hands, I smile quietly. Not the smile of someone who has won, but the smile of someone who has survived, who has risen again from a place where it once seemed there was no way out. Silence does not mean weakness. I have come to understand that silence can also be strength, because only in silence could I truly hear the voice of my own heart. And this time, my heart tells me I didn't lose a daughter, I lost my chains. If you were me, what would you do? Would you stay silent and endure, just to preserve the fragile appearance of a home already broken? Or would you choose to walk away, cutting the chains to keep your freedom and your dignity? Each person will have a different answer. But I believe this story isn't mine alone. It is a mirror reflecting the hidden corners of many families, where love is sometimes clouded by selfishness, and sacrifice is sometimes taken for granted. I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Share your feelings in the comments if you were in this situation. What would you choose? Because who knows? Your answer might be the encouragement someone out there needs as they face the same kind of pain. And if this story has touched your heart, don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next stories. Stories about family, about love, about loss and renewal. Stories that may bring you to tears, but also remind you that no matter your age, you still have the right to reclaim peace and freedom for yourself. This is Shattered Trust, where every broken promise leads to a stronger ending. Follow for the next story.